Hi, it's Morgan with 1455. It is our mission to advance the art and craft of the written word and to build a dynamic and innovative creative community. We offer a variety of free online and in person programs, which are fully supported by our sponsors and by viewers like you. If you would like to make a donation of any amount, please visit 1455litarts.org and click support. Your contribution will be greatly appreciated. We'll see you on the next one.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another awesome author event sponsored by 1455. I'm Sean Murphy. I'm the executive director of 1455. For those of you that don't know us, I'll be very brief. We are a nonprofit literary organization whose mission and purpose is really to showcase and celebrate writing and writers by any means necessary. And our longer term goal is to renovate a year-round writers retreat in Winchester, Virginia. For obvious reasons, we've shifted all of our programming to virtual. And while that has reflected the disruption, both on a societal level and the topic for tonight's discussion, the blessing of this is that it has enabled opportunities like this where we can actually gather writers literally from around the country to come together and talk. So despite what I think we'd all agree has been a really challenging year, there's been some bright spots. And I certainly am grateful for this opportunity to connect in a very real sense, albeit virtually, with writers we wouldn't otherwise be able to pull together. So thank you for being here. And let me introduce what we're doing tonight. I think if you've tuned in, you see that we're talking about Alone Together. That is an anthology that came out this year, which is a COVID anthology. It gathers dozens of brilliant writers who contributed essays, fiction, poetry, interviews, observations, and it's kind of an instant classic. It became a very vital, very necessary kind of antidote to, I think, the confusion and despair that all of us were feeling, but I think the artistic community too, really feeling kind of shut off from our communities, our ability to interact. And it really brought us into the here and now in the sense of up until 2020, a reading meant people got together and listened and saw someone reading. And I think what this anthology celebrates and proves is that writers and artists endure and adapt and can make beautiful things out of times of challenge. This is also a reunion of sorts in that with one exception, I've talked to everybody on this panel tonight for the 1455 interview, and all those videos are available on our YouTube page. And we did have a special panel this summer at our Lit Fest about Alone Together. So I think this is a beautiful bookend with different readers to do even more kind of exposure to the types of reading that this anthology contains. And lastly, for now, I'll just say, if you haven't already done so, please buy this anthology, support writers, support writing, support independent booksellers. If you go to 1455 site, we're partners with the Potter's House in DC, which is a historic social gathering place and bookstore, but there's any number of independent bookstores that I think all of us know we can support and should support. So enough of that. I want to thank our co-host this evening, Jennifer Haupt, who is the editor of this anthology. I consider her a friend and definitely an inspiration. I'll introduce her by saying that it was really just a sheer force of will, and I'll let her explain both the idea and execution of this unbelievable achievement. But it's clear to look back now, some months later, and say that for what she pulled together in such a short period of time was nothing short of heroic. And the response has been phenomenal, both in terms of the people she pulled together, but also the people whose lives this has touched. So I hope everyone tuning in tonight is going to hear these phenomenal writers and go explore their work and do their part to make it a point to get a copy of this. It's the end of the year. Put this on your wish list, give it out as holiday gifts, and do your part. Enough. Jennifer, I am going to start by introducing you because you are the prime mover of all of this, without which we wouldn't be here tonight. So A, thank you, and B, welcome. I will read your bio, and then I'll welcome you on to say some words.
Let me first just thank you for having us all on, Sean, because this is really lovely on so many levels. So thank you for giving us an excuse to get out of pajamas and,
Well, my pleasure. Thank you for that, but absolutely my pleasure. And as I usually say at all these events that I host, it's absolutely selfish that for me that the opportunity to hear from and engage with writers I admire, it's a win-win. So absolutely a pleasure. And again, it means more when you really believe in the work you're doing. To validate and support this work is easy to do because it comes from the heart. So yeah, any little modest way that I can help bring light to something that's very worthy is very meaningful to me. So Jennifer is the editor of Alone Together, Love, Grief, and Comfort in the Time of COVID-19. Along with our friends here tonight, I'll introduce alphabetically: Gina Frangelo, Susan Henderson, Stephen P. Kiernan, Susan Rich, Lena Khalaf Tuffaha, and let me, as promised, talk about Jen first. Her essays and articles have been published in O, the Oprah magazine, Parenting, The Rumpus, Spirituality and Health, and The Sun, and many other publications. She also curates the popular Psychology Today blog, One True Thing, a collection of essays for authors and readers. Her debut novel, In the Shadow of 10,000 Hills, was awarded the Forward Review's Bronze Indie Award for historical fiction. Jen, enough for me. Please take the stage and talk to us about how this labor of love came together.
Okay, well, I think the probably easiest way I can do it is just to read part of the introduction I wrote. So I'm going to do that. Okay. I'm an introvert, like many writers, considering the solitude of my attic office a luxury. But I also need balance, coffee dates with friends, exchanging a smile of solidarity with the woman lifting weights next to me at the gym, and asking local booksellers for their must-reads of the month. I depend on these daily interactions to energize me. All of these people are threads in my safety net, most without realizing it. I know from experience that too easily staying home can turn from a luxury to a state of paralysis. When the stay-at-home order was enacted in March, my connections with the outside world were frayed. By the third week of the quarantine, it was clear to me this was not going away anytime soon. Driving home the point, I received a devastating blow. The contract for my second novel was canceled due to the plummeting economy. Of course, I wasn't the only one who lost their livelihood. Unemployment claims surpassed 15 million and lines at understocked food banks stretched toward the horizon. Small businesses were going bankrupt by the score. Forced to shut down for a few weeks, a few months, no one was really sure how long it would be before they could reopen, assuming they would be solvent. The uncertainty, no end in sight, launched our entire country into a fugue-like state of shock. Taking some kind of positive action, moving outward into the world again, became a necessity for my survival. But what could I do? I didn't have money or power or influence, but one thing I did have was community. I knew a lot of writers through my work as a journalist and blogging and being a book reviewer over the years. And so an idea began forming, a gut feeling that energized me for the first time in weeks. Maybe I could rally authors to support the booksellers who had placed so many of our books into the hands of readers and now needed our help. So I started by putting out feelers on Facebook and sending emails to authors I knew through my work. And I made a concrete to the point ask. Could they contribute an essay or a poem about the COVID-19 experience to a fundraising anthology for struggling indie booksellers? Within 24 hours, dozens of authors were on board, and I became bolder, reaching out to a diverse range of writers I admired. During the next month, I jumped out of bed each morning, excited to see what would land in my email box that day. I didn't know exactly what I was creating, but every new poem and essay was a potential fragment of the soul of what I called my lovely monster. Part of the tremendous unease during the pandemic has been recognizing that we are in the midst of transformation, with no clear sense of where it will lead and little reassuring guidance along the way. The missives arriving in my email box daily nourished me. There were stories of love triumphing over social distancing. There were surprising, moving images of love intertwined with grief and comfort. There were poems constructed out of possibilities, images of something cracking open, of a glittering road, of shedding our hatred and fear like a virus. As the pandemic stretched into May, the stories and poetry reflected the rising anxiety and anger permeating our country. George Floyd's final words, "I can't breathe," sparked a connection that took us out of our dark COVID-19 fugue state. It had us asking a vast, overwhelming question that became the pumping heart of this book. What now? The privilege and reward of putting together this lovely monster was that it allowed me to unite for a common good with 91 authors from diverse cultures and backgrounds. This book has developed a soul thanks to every one of them. She holds our collective pain and our dreams, and I hope she offers you what she has given me, a renewed sense of possibilities. In telling our stories, we hope to enable you to tell your story. That's the sweet spot of connection where the healing happens. So that's it in a nutshell.
That is in a nutshell. So thank you for sharing that. I've heard you read that. I've read it, I think, several times now, and it's perfect. It captures, everything. As a storyteller should. It gives us the beginning, the middle, and the fact that it isn't even ended yet, I think, is probably the most important part. That it's a kind of what you did is kind of initiate this dialogue amongst writers and for readers and for other writers. And certainly the feedback I've gotten from people that have seen the content we've provided has been undeniably positive. So
well, and I have to say that, some of the first authors to contribute were Susan Henderson and Gina Frangelo, and the more authors who contributed spurred on other authors. So it really became this sort of rolling, ball of goodness, for lack of better. And so I really, I always feel squirmy when people say that, it's something that I initiated it, but every single author helped to bring something to it and other people to it. And I know, like, Stephen came to it through Jenna Bloom, and it just and Lena came through it through another author friend of mine, Sonora Jha. And so it's kind of just this, I really think it's this community pumping heart, which during the isolation has been an amazing comfort, I think.
Indeed. Well, I think what could be better than to hear the talented authors that are here tonight, read their words in their own voices, and that will be the ultimate testament to the diverse kind of range of topics and themes and concerns. So for no better reason than it makes sense, we'll go in alphabetical order. So why don't we start with Gina Frangelo, and I'll introduce her. Gina is the author of 4 books of fiction and a forthcoming memoir in 2021, Blow Your House Down. She has nearly 20 years of experience as an editor, having founded both the independent press Other Voices Books and the fiction section of the popular online literary community, The Nervous Breakdown. Her short fiction, essays, book reviews, and journalism have been published in a wide variety of magazines and anthologies. Gina, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm going to read an abridged version of my essay, which Jen was kind enough to publish in its totality on the Psychology Today blog. It's called Final Act. We didn't even know how to use Zoom an hour ago, but here we were sending out Zoom invitations to our pop-up wedding. It was supposed to happen in June in California, but would instead take place on March 24th, 2020, in our Chicago living room with less than 24 hours notice. Rob and I hadn't even written vows yet. The wedding dress I'd bought for summer needed to be professionally taken up and tailored, so it was useless now. The only people who would be in attendance for the ceremony were my 3 kids from my first marriage, all home with us during the COVID-19 quarantine, and our makeshift officiator, the drummer in Rob's band. Truth is sometimes described as being surprising at first, but inevitable upon reflection. And the truth is that absolutely nothing in the 8 years of our relationship had ever gone as planned. Rob and I met more than 20 years ago when he submitted a short story across the transom to the nonprofit literary magazine I then edited. Over the years, we crossed paths randomly. He was the runner-up in a contest where we launched a book press. We published another story of his in the magazine. Finally, we accepted a novel of his for publication, which was released in 2013. By then, we were a year deep into a passionate and clandestine extramarital affair. We had both been married forever, 2 decades apiece, give or take a few years. Although our marital relationships were radically different, neither of us had ever cheated on our spouses prior to our affair. We spent some 3 years ending it with one another, but repeatedly falling back together before we finally reconciled to our inability to cleave and each confessed to our spouses. Though we of course expected a devastating fallout, we had little idea how wide-ranging and brutal the aftermath would truly be. Rob lived in LA. His literary, music, and recovery communities were all in Southern California, as well as an almost constant sunshine that helped the depression that was a frequent byproduct of his bipolar disorder. I lived in Chicago with my 3 kids and 2 elderly parents I'd been caretaking for nearly a decade. Rob would fly to Chicago and then back to his ex's apartment in Southern California with preposterously short turnovers, while I worked overtime to normalize my children's lives amidst divorce. Even when my father died, I didn't bring Rob to the memorial service, but kept him tucked away out of shame. I was living my life in atonement mode. Then I got breast cancer. I was diagnosed 7 months after my marital separation and 2 months after my father's death. About 6 weeks after that, Rob spent the night with me in my family home for the first time and stayed for a month and a half while I underwent a bilateral radical mastectomy. It was then that my kids were able to see him caring for me, stripping my mastectomy drains and going with me to doctor appointments and doing all the household chores, and slowly began the process of forgiving, accepting, and beginning to bond. My surgery was successful, my margins were clear, and Rob's and my intense attraction and connection had more than survived my body's alteration. At the very end of 2017, Rob moved to Chicago full-time. Soon afterwards, I had a full hip replacement from a complication from my chemo. My daughters went off to college to California, which had by then become our second city, and my beloved mother died. Through all of these hardships, Rob was by my side, holding me up, helping me find laughter, and still making my body surge in the ways that defied menopause and the alleged invisibility of the middle-aged American woman. Rob and I met when we were both youngish, both healthy, when life was as easy as it was ever going to be. Now here we were in the middle of a global pandemic. My daughter's back from California to shelter in place with us, our youngest child home from a shuttered elementary school. Then Rob's divorce papers suddenly arrived in the mail, and all we wanted was to be married, to face this crucible together as husband and wife. Are you sure you don't want to get married in California later on? I asked more than once. He had changed his entire life to be with me, and California remained a magical place to him, where he yearned to celebrate our wedding with his longtime community at a beach ceremony, followed by an offbeat reception at his favorite dive bar. I don't care about any of that, he reassured me, smiling, while the world collapsed around us. I'm marrying you. I'm the luckiest man in the world. At least do it on Zoom, a close California friend admonished us, to which we mutually groaned, we don't understand Zoom. And so he walked us through it. And then and there, the night before the wedding, of the 82 Zoom invites we hastily sent, some 70 friends and family attended the following evening at 5:30 p.m., weak, half-gray Chicago daylight still lighting our living room. I chose a dress I'd worn on our dream trip to Paris, along with my daughter's Doc Marten combat boots. Rob wore a too big blazer one of his students had once taken off and given him impromptu at a party. Some of our virtual guests donned swanky hats and long white gloves with their pajama bottoms. And there in our shared home, in front of so many people who had witnessed our journey, both the harrowing and the beautiful parts, we promised to have each other's backs, to be each other's final acts, and, as Rob tells me every day, never to take a moment of our incredible life together for granted. We fully hope and expect to outlast this turbulent period in world history, to be standing on the other side among those who remember together. But in our story of the unexpected, taking nothing for granted also entails a full understanding of the transience and impermanence of life. Part of why we traveled this arduous road when either one of us had plenty of cause at any moment to reverse course and give up was precisely for this reason. In our darkest hour, we are now exactly where we want to be.
Thank you, Gina. I'll just say this applies to everybody. The only downside, and I say that with maximum sarcasm, of my involvement in this anthology is that the writing is so beautiful and extraordinary that my list of books to read from all of the authors here has exponentially grown. But as I just joked with Stephen last night during our conversation, what else is there to do in life but to add to that list? But I both thank you and curse all of you for writing so well that you've made me, quadruple my wish list from Santa and so forth. But Gina, thanks for sharing that story of resilience and love.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, next up is Sue Henderson. Sue, I'm glad you're here. Sue is a Hawthornden International Fellow, a 5-time Pushcart Prize nominee, and the recipient of an Academy of an American Poets Award. She's the author of the novels Up from the Blue and The Flicker of Old Dreams, both published by HarperCollins. A lifetime member of the NAACP and the National Book Critics Circle, she lives in New York and blogs at the Writer Support Group. I think your bio caught off there. The Writer Support Group. Sue, help me out. What did we miss? The Writer Support Group?
Lit Park.
Yeah, Lit Park, and I know that because that's your Twitter handle. Sue, thank you for being here, and I'm so glad to see you and your amazing backdrop again, which I remember from our conversation the other month.
My pleasure. I feel like I should say real quick, Gina published my very first flash fiction piece, probably 20 years ago, when we were both editors of different magazines, and it was such a nice ushering into the community that ended up basically saving my life year after year. So thanks. Do you want me to read a little bit?
Of course.
Okay.
I insist that you read a little bit.
So I'm going to read a very abbreviated version of mine. I had written it in flash fiction, and I think I did that at the time because I was in the middle of grief, and I was kind of, I needed to do things in fragments, and so that's how the writing came out. But I feel like this year's been such a tough year, and I've just kind of begun to feel like I'm crawling back up towards the light. So I'm picking parts of this that are kind of keeping me where I need to be right now. My story is called Quarantine. Masks. My mom and I sit 6 feet apart in the living room of my childhood home, both of us in masks and gloves. My father died last night, and I drove from New York to Northern Virginia to be with her. While she cries, I sit here on the other side of the room, feeling my own breath against my face. It's an awful way to grieve. For 14 days, I can't hug her. Worse is knowing since my father died, no one has hugged her. Obituary. This is one of my favorite memories of my dad. My kids, 8 and 10 at the time, talked him into digging a moat in our yard. They spent the whole day shoveling and making a drawbridge, none of us remembering that the cesspool was buried in that same spot. I'm trying to write my dad's obituary, and this is one of the many stories I cut to stay within our budget. Flag. I drive my dad's car to the funeral home to pick up his ashes and the folded flag they give to military servicemen. It's raining and I can't find the switch for the wipers. At the funeral home, I stand dripping on the carpet. All of us wear masks. They set a bag on the table, my father. When they step away, I'm allowed to approach. I'm surprised by the sense of relief that he's with me again, that I'm taking him home. Rain thumps the roof as I pull off the highway. I stop for a long time in the Pentagon parking lot where he taught me to drive. Sometimes I'm fine. Sometimes I weep with no sound. Next sunny day, the boy across the street stands at the end of our walkway and plays a Bach sonata on his violin. My mom sits on the steps in her mask, only the flag to hug. Cans. The neighbors wheel their recycling cans to the curb and point the handles toward the road. Our can is filled with unfinished bottles of Ensure and unread newspapers. I assume the virus is on the trash cans, the mail, the door handle. I wash my hands, but have I been careful enough? Teeth. I find a box of my baby teeth. They are taped to the bottom and numbered in the order I lost them. I'm falling apart. But unlike my father who suffered quietly, I rant and slam doors. Music. I cry easily these days. Ask the poor receptionists at the Pentagon Federal Credit Union and Dominion Energy. But there are signs we'll be okay. My mother has begun to reimagine her life going forward. She thinks the room where we watch TV could become an art studio. She's unpacked her guitar, it's been decades, and keeps it propped beside the couch. During my shower, I blast Earth, Wind, and Fire and discover I can still feel joy. Salute. The last time I saw my father, he took baby steps, panting, holding the wall, so he could wave to me from behind the screen door. He weighed 100 pounds when he died. Those last days I spent with him were brutal, tender, and honor. Masks. All I desire anymore are simple things: to be out in the world without a mask, to pet a stranger's dog, to sit close enough to the people I love to hear them breathe. I walk past my elementary school, empty now, and slip into the woods behind it. That last image of my father sits like a weight in my chest. I take every trail until the exertion reminds me to let air in. I step off the path to make room for a woman with a bandana tied around her face. We are connected, all of us with our smiles and sorrows hidden from each other, all of us so in need of human touch. As the woman continues on her walk, I check my phone. I've been here longer than I planned. I turn back toward the house and start to run out of the woods and through my childhood streets. For 14 days, no one has hugged my mom, but our quarantine is finally over. I hurry and, reaching for the door, have already flung off my mask.
Wow. Thank you so much, Sue. I have a confession that I reread your piece this afternoon. Like I read all of the pieces, and I thought to myself, how am I going to get through this without crying like a baby? And I think
I skipped those bits.
still hearing your voice and your kind of this calming, peaceful, positive presence just brought out the real beauty and love. So it's not a happy piece, but it's also not a sad piece. It's a very restorative piece. And gosh, it's such a maybe unintentional metaphor for so much of what we've all been through this year on a lot of levels. But
well, I was kind of thinking, back to Gina's piece, what we're all dealing with right now, it feels like it's a time of clarifying and kind of recalibrating. Like when the pandemic first started, it was all about when am I going to get back to normal? And then the longer it's gone on, it's made me feel like maybe normal's not where I want to go back to. Maybe I want to, in some ways, like in a physical sense, we've been decluttering our space because we're all like crammed in the same space all the time with the same people. So we've been like getting rid of stuff. And I feel like in this kind of grace period we're in right now, it's like, what matters? What can we get rid of so that we make more space for what matters? And it just feels like this time has just made it clearer what I need in my life and what was just extraneous.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well said. And we can, when we're done with the readings, I definitely have some questions for all of you about how we're continuing to navigate creatively through where this new abnormal. Okay, next up, Stephen P. Kiernan. As a journalist and novelist, Stephen has had more than 4 million words in print. Author of the novels Universe of Two, The Baker's Secret, The Hummingbird, and The Curiosity, he's also written the nonfiction books Last Rites and Authentic Patriotism. His work has won more than 40 awards, and he's also lectured and consulted nationally on hospice and end-of-life care. He lives in Vermont. Stephen, thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for wearing that awesome blazer.
Actually, it's just a flannel shirt, but thanks. it's just I work in the basement. It gets cold at night. My experience right now is sort of like my experience of being in this anthology, which, from the 2 readings we've just had, it's this sort of humbling realization that you're going to be among excellence. So I thank you both for the pieces you read, and I'm a little intimidated by it. And, Sean, I'm delighted that you pulled us together in this event together. And Jennifer, I still can't believe that you made this anthology happen with such excellence and so fast. Just an incredible accomplishment. And I'm so honored to be part of it that I actually bathed and shaved before this. So I'm really throwing down here. The other thing that's amazing is to think that when we were in kind of the horror of the time when we were writing the pieces for this anthology, we were approaching 90,000 people who had died. And we are so far beyond that. We've tripled that now. Yesterday was, I think, the most deaths ever and 200,000 new cases. There's going to be a lot of art that emerges from this. In some ways, times like this are what art is for. And so is gathering. And I'm really happy to be gathered with you. And I'm going to read a short poem. So I'm going to take a second to explain. We all have had our times, right? When in the course of this, we're fine. And then there's a day we're just not fine. We may not be sick. We may not have lost someone we love to COVID, but the restraints and constraints on our lives give us the blues. And I was in a day where I was feeling great, and I called my friend Jenna Bloom, who's a very, very skilled novelist and somebody I rely on a lot. She reads my drafts, she gives me great feedback, she gets me inspired, she talks to me about marketing ideas for books and stuff. And I called her, and she was in one of those down days. And I thought, well, this is great. I finally get to repay a little bit. She had terrible blues, and I said, will you eat something? And she said, no. And I said, will you take a bath? And she said, maybe. And she ate a little something, and she got in the bath, and I read poems to her, and it's sort of like what we're doing right here, is art as a kind of solace, as a comfort. And I read Major Jackson and Sharon Olds and Lee Young Lee and W.S. Merwin and Stephen Dobbins, and for probably 45 minutes or so, I just read her poems, and she didn't say anything. Maybe she'd say, I like that one. I said, not much. And then, I couldn't resist, and I snuck one of mine in, and she knew immediately because, of course, I was reading Merwin and Olds, and and she's like, did you write that one? And it's like a lament poem, and I said yes. And so that's how this is the poem that ended up in the anthology. It was about how we can console one another with art. So I dedicate this reading tonight with love to Jenna. This poem is called These Nights of Candles. The old man raises his cane and fences with the swords of gladiolus. He's frenzied in the garden. The sun inches west, and on its last red edge, matches are being struck, lighters thumbed, the candles begin. Though some people are already asleep. The postman, his fingers inked by commerce and wordy romance, not one promise or plea written to him. The early rising baker, a bachelor till his last baguette. The fisherman whose wife stands at the window, staring at a sea that contains nothing but her vague reflection on the glass. And the butcher's wife, reluctantly, lies down for her heavy husband, and after a time feels like meat pounded on the gristle. The preacher sips red before a blank page, certain the sermon will appear whole once he finds the first word, while the silence of the house presses down. Nearby, the drunkard prepares his singing voice and wonders who did this to his hands. The old man is led to his room and left there. These nights of candles, these heartbreaks burned low, are not the only kind. Somewhere, someone is making a toast to 10 friends. Some man is kissing a woman's belly and she's laughing. A baby under blankets breathes like the moon's phases, like falling snow. Some candles light a page, or a window, or a church, or a birth, or a friend's or a lover's face. But tonight, like most nights, When I cup my hand behind the flame, when it highlights every whorl and ridge and fortune teller's line, and I breathe in, I know I am about to lose you forever again. And no kind of light can save me, and I cannot help breathing out. There's a brief glow in the wick's tip, but then the smoke. The old man sits a hard chair and remembers. Down in the street, a moonbright hound howls and howls and howls.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And I think Jen can appreciate this with me. Very full circle moment because Jenna was in our Lit Fest this summer on the Alone Together panel and read her essay, which included
great.
And talking about it. So hearing the same story from both of you to bookend these events is, I think, an unexpected piece of wonderful.
That's pretty cool. Did she read the poem too?
I don't know if she read an excerpt or she read the whole thing. I honestly don't remember, but I mean,
It just makes me want to read her essay and kind of imitate her voice, you know?
It's wonderful. And you and I can talk offline because we both, I know Jenna for many years. So yet another instance of kind of our micro communities, not surprisingly, have all these points of connection. And again, events like this and kind of the desire to share and shine light on each other's work brings us all, into each other's orbit, which I'm just so profoundly grateful for.
One of the things that's wonderful about writing as opposed to, being a violinist or a dancer, or especially dancers or actors, is that we are not in competition with one another. We're not auditioning for the same gig. And so we can be much more like family.
I want to just leave that alone, but I'll add, even in the community, I think some are not like that. And, to their own, great misfortune. I think those that realize at whatever point of their lives that the rising tide does lift boats and we aren't in competition gives an added joy to the whole enterprise. And people that don't figure that out, I think, are missing out on the whole beauty of what this life is because there's so much solitude and there's so much rejection. But I appreciate you saying that because I certainly couldn't agree with that more. And I think tonight really epitomizes that.
I hate to interrupt, but I have to say that was the beauty of this book, was that it was everyone, there was no ego involved. There really wasn't. And honestly, I think that's really unusual. And, in terms of like, it's so different than when I was, marketing my book after, a book of mine that I'm trying to get out into the world. It's such a different thing than everyone coming together to, do these events together. And it was just, I love that. And I really thank everyone for that.
Kumbaya, everybody.
Yeah. Hey, and if writers can't take showers and put on, at least from the waist up, half decent clothes, what better testament to this community? All right, next up, Susan Rich. Let me introduce her. Susan is the author of 4 collections of poetry, including Cloud Pharmacy, The Alchemist's Kitchen, which was named a finalist for the Forward Prize and the Washington State Book Award. Cures include Travel and The Cartographer's Tongue, which was winner of the PEN USA Award for Poetry and the Peace Corps Writers Award. Along with Brian Turner and Jared Hockley, she's the editor of The Strangest of Theaters, Poets Writing Across Borders, and her poems have appeared in, among others, Harvard Review, New England Review, and the Southern Review. Susan, thanks for being here. I can't wait to hear you read.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I hadn't met Jen before this project, or maybe once kind of in passing at maybe Hugo House or Hedgebrook, but Lena and I had met a long time ago in the days when people did things in person. And I still have this strong memory. I was teaching a class to benefit Hedgebrook at the Seattle Art Museum, and Lena had signed up to take it. And at the end, you came up to me and said something about how you were really searching for community And that's going to be like 8 or 9 years ago. And now I think of Lena as someone who has lots of community and brings community together. So I think that's one of the nicer things about getting older, is those connections where we keep intersecting in different ways. So it's good to see you in this way, although I'd rather be sharing a meal with you.
Yes, I miss meals and hugs. So thank you for saying that.
Okay, I don't think I'm going to say too much about this poem, except that COVID feels so different now. I feel like when these pieces were written, when Jen was putting the anthology together, it was like COVID innocence, if there was ever such a thing. And I can remember being really excited about all the differences and paying attention, telling my students they had to be writing everything down. And now 9-10 months later, I'm just tired of it. So I'm just glad to have pieces that remind me at some point there, before the deaths started accruing and accruing and accruing, that there was something magical about it. I remember really early on, and I'm almost embarrassed to admit this, saying something to someone like, well, the whole world is going on a writing retreat, because it felt like, it felt good to not having to spend time commuting back and forth to work and wondering if I was going to get to class on time. Anyway, enough of that. Here's the poem. It's called Song at the End of the Mind. I think of you as a radio frequency, sometimes hard to find as I touch the illuminated dial. But tonight you arrive, murmuring in my ear in half sleep. You offer a suitcase of small pleasures and laughter that somersaults across the country. In this time of shelter in place, we are fevered wanderers with nothing but an open screen, handheld devices offering luminous ellipses. We heal the earthquaked bones of our pasts, decorating rough mouths with new vocabularies, no longer deferred. As the world quiets, I awake to our longings, all that is left, to congregate close along the shoreline, unbandaged and unadorned, to listen to the smooth rhythm and cues of quarantine radio. This one goes out to you.
Wow. Thank you so much for to hear you read that. I've read that several times on my own. Deceptively short and deceptively simple. There's so much contained in that poem. And for me, for my money, you just nail so many of the feelings and emotions. I think you sell yourself short in your introduction, in the sense that, none of us knew, none of us could have dared think that this was going to continue as long as it has. But that poem has staying power. I think it's going to be a touchstone for a lot of people in terms of remembering where we were and where we continue to be. So I thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Okay, last and certainly not least, we have Lena Khalaf Tuffaha, and I'll introduce her. She is an Arab American poet, essayist, and translator. Her full-length collection, Water and Salt, won the 2018 Washington State Book Award. Her chapbook, Arab in Newsland, won the 2016 Two Sylvia's Press Prize. And Letters from the Interior is a finalist for the 2020 Jean Piedrick Chapbook Prize. Her essays have been published in multiple magazines, and she lives in Redmond, Washington with her family. Lena, thank you for being here. I can't wait to hear you read.
Thank you so much. It's really lovely to be with all of you and to hear your voices infuse your words. It's a completely different experience than reading them on the page, equally lovely, but a real pleasure. And thank you. I get to see Jen for the first time. I only know her through email, so it's nice to see your face and say thank you sort of in person in the way that we can in these COVID times. I will just say that I really didn't want to write a pandemic poem. Like I was sort of fighting with myself in the beginning. The whole time I was frustrated and scared and, having on the roller coaster of emotions that I'm sure we're all on as this event just built and built and changed every part of our lives. And as writers do, I just gave in to the page because, you don't really have a choice as a writer. And I'm glad I did, because I think that it gave me the opportunity to capture, the range of contradictions. I was just hyper aware of all the contradictions, the kind of high relief that they were all in. So that's some of what this poem comes from. Apex Gazing, a record of March 2020. It was the time of late empire, and science and song were all the rage. Chart after nightly chart were rushed to the screen. Hieroglyphs better left undeciphered. The news reports a forecast of the magnitude of impending losses, how late we were arriving at our great battle. It was the time of loud lies, and we baked until the stores ran out of flour, our cookies delectable with a dusting of cinnamon to warm the tongue, our butter browned, our sugar raw, indelicate. It was the time of virtual gatherings, and together we named the flowering street trees beyond our windows. Prunus spinosa that erupted in flowers like globes of snow. Prunus cerulata that canopied our cautious strolls. Our distant loved ones were closer and more unreachable as the largest birds of our era lay dormant in our airports. They sent photographs of their trees too. Tilia cordata of childhood memory, Jacaranda mimosaphilia not yet bloomed, a symphony on the verge. It was the time of best case scenarios, and we tracked and cataloged, each of us drafting a field guide for the terra nullius that awaited us. Stay home, Melaspisa melodia chirped with singular clarity. Cyaniceta stellari rustled through evergreens and azuline flashes, a choir discordant in the silence of cities ailing and freeways shorn of their gridlock. It was the time of paltry metaphors, and even the believers among us soured at the prospect of April miracles. Our grief gusted and downpoured, vernal restlessness swelling each day beneath our roofs. It was the time of superlatives, and we languished. Postponements cluttered our calendars. Between fears and stretching, we alternated, child and parent, bewildered. We wiped down every surface, renewed in our frailty. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Lena, and also thank you for mentioning the honesty with which you mentioned that you didn't particularly want to write about COVID, because I think that also kind of summarizes not only this event and this anthology, but this notion that, and I'll speak for myself, but I truly believe that in a time like this, which I think we're increasingly realizing, we are, and future generations are going to view this period of time through the prism of COVID. It's a historical global event. And I think artists like yourselves that either were obliged or compelled or cajoled into sharing thoughts is a supreme act of selflessness and an act of giving. And I think one of the reasons that this anthology will endure as a touchstone is because it shows that we need to hear from sensitive people making sense of things that seem senseless. And I think everyone's reading tonight, they're also personal, but they're also so connected by this theme. So I feel very enriched by hearing all of your words. We've got a little under 10 minutes, but I feel like I'd be remiss if we didn't do a quick kind of round table. If you want to indulge me, I just think it would be worthwhile. And I want to also say, I was going to say to bookend, I think this work and this anthology go on, so there's no expiration date. But when all of you wrote your pieces, we were, as it turns out, more to the beginning than the end. do you have any thoughts about what has or hasn't changed in terms of how you're writing and your routine, or how you're viewing engagement now that this is kind of the new normal for the foreseeable future? Does
Well,
anyone?
I think I started to say I had a certain innocence. I think that's the word last March. And I think about my students. We were all learning Zoom pretty much overnight together. And this one student who I adored, Daniela, she would come to class in her pajamas in bed and have cereal each morning of class and say brilliant things while doing these things. And so I was really taken. There were lots of stories. Somebody's dog would start barking and then everybody's dogs would start barking. And it all felt like a certain pleasure in the beginning. And I'm still teaching on Zoom. I'm still having students, and it doesn't have that feel anymore. We've all become so normalized to it that there's lots more of my students have COVID. Lots more people are ending up leaving because there's family in hospitals or people dying. So that's the difference I see. In the beginning, I felt like I wasn't touched by this worldwide epidemic, and that's no longer true. So I feel like I've lost my innocence. I think that's probably a common feeling.
I think also just a sense that we had no idea how long it was going to last, and I was in the middle of about to have a literary festival in Bombay Beach. It was set to take place. I think our start date was March 23rd, and it was to run until March 29th. We had about 100 writers and artists and people who were screening films and so forth, converging on this tiny town, Bombay Beach, near the Salton Sea in California. It was planned. We were making the flyers. We'd been in, the desert sun and written about and so forth. And we started watching, things getting canceled, Festival of Books and Coachella and blah, blah, blah. We canceled and it didn't happen. But at that time, I think everyone was just sort of like, we'll do it in the fall. We'll be back in the fall. And now it just seems like it's hard to imagine what it's going to take for things to ever really be the way they were, like just the thoughtlessness of being able to go hear a band live or hug and kiss all your friends. Like, you watch television and it feels like everything is a historical drama because they're not wearing masks and they touch and they're all in crowds. So
right before we went into when it wasn't really even fully a lockdown, but things shut down more or less in early March in Redmond, I was supposed to go and participate in a literary festival that was happening for the first time ever called Palestine Writes. And it was a festival for Palestinian writers in New York that was bringing people together from all over the globe, from all over the diaspora and in Palestine. And I cannot even begin to explain my excitement about that gathering that defied history and politics and geography, and that Herculean effort it took for people to make that real. And of course, COVID. And so that got scrapped. And I just yesterday got to moderate the plenary of that festival online on Zoom. And it was really touching and beautiful to see the work that people did to make that happen online. But the thing that I'm really thinking about and have been thinking about, frankly, through the summer is how the pandemic is this horrific event that's happening, but there are a lot of other horrific events that were happening and haven't stopped happening underneath and inside of the pandemic, like refugees are still suffering. We've seen the kind of uprising that we've had in our cities across the United States in response to police brutality this summer. So this pandemic has just put a big old lens on top of everything that was already so challenging and painful and complex and needed our immediate attention. And just everything feels so dialed up and so much more intense and demanding of, urgent love and attention. That's sort of the headspace I'm in now.
I'm just going to jump in for a second because it kind of goes with both of these things. But I run a poetry festival at the college where I teach, which of course is April. So we spent March rescheduling everyone from April into May. We thought we'll just postpone a month. We'll be able to get together in a month. And so dealing with everybody's literary agents and contracts. And Naomi Shihab was one of the poets who we'd been waiting 4 or 5 years to find a date to have her come. And now we're looking at, it was just announced a couple of weeks ago, our college is not opening, which is of course the right decision, but we're trying to figure out, are we going to have Naomi Shihab and Jericho Brown online? Are we going to postpone them again? It just feels like nobody knows like what will be long enough. And so again, all of these things just, again, I just remember thinking, how could we possibly have thought a month was plenty of time and we'd still have Poetry Month?
You know,
Christina, oh, go ahead.
well, please, you first.
No, I wanted to just echo what Lena said in terms of like life does not stop, like all of these things, you know, when I think back to what we were doing about a year ago now, I was down at the border like last fall, and, you know, things that were crises already are so ratcheted up now. It's hard to imagine, you know, that could have been a time of innocence when already things were so turbulent in this country for the past 4 years, well, for the past forever, and that those things seem now, you know, crisis light compared to how they all amplified once this.
So the thing I was going to add to that, I think you're right. I agree with everything that's been said. And one thing I feel like adding is maybe also from the perspective of being a single person and living in a very rural place. I'm up a dirt road in Vermont, you know, not so far from the Canadian border kind of thing. And so I'm aware of aloneness on top of the solitude of work right now. It's really nice to see your faces. And what our role is as writers and how that's been enlarged for me. Quick story. I was, you know, I had a novel come out in August, and of course the tour was canceled and was turned into Zooms. And you know, who in their right mind on an August weeknight is going to get on a Zoom at 7 o'clock, right? It's August, it's beautiful. You know, people came, they were lovely, and I was honored to have them there, but it was not at all the same experience. And I had one event that was in person, and it was in Hardwick, Vermont, which is in a part of the state called the Northeast Kingdom, very rural. Some people farm with horses there instead of tractors. It's very beautiful. And they have a great library and bookstore in that town. And they use the outdoor pavilion kind of next to the Little League fields with their picnic tables. And they had an event there. And people would show up and they'd say there were 3 people and they'd put 3 chairs this distance apart from the other chairs. And everyone sort of worked it out. And it was so great and exciting to be in front of actual people. And when you said something silly or self-mocking, whatever, they'd actually laugh and you could hear them laugh. It was so great. But this really fun time. When it was over, I didn't want to go home. You know, I signed books and everyone went on the way. A couple days later, the bookstore owner said, hey, you know, one of the people who was there is a woman who's, you know, a blogger for our local newspaper and in our community. You might be interested to see what she wrote about the event. Well, I have an ego. Of course I went. I have vanity. I looked her up and it read like this. The other night I went to see P Kiernan talk about his new book, Universe of Two, and we were at the pavilion. And on the way in, I saw the parents of my son's girlfriend. And we had a nice conversation about, you know, there's the summer nights and are they getting home at a reasonable hour? And then we sat down and Stephen started talking and he seemed like a nice person. There was a book about World War II or something. And then I saw the kindergarten teacher my sons had, and I was so happy to see them. And Stephen was talking, and then the sun was going down. It was so beautiful. And there I was with my neighbors, and he said something funny about one of the questions, and it was so great to be, and I realized like my actual existence was a tiny, tiny piece of why she was there, that we are, all of us, sort of mechanisms for them to gather. And that one of the cool things about the arts, more the performing arts than us, but us too, is that these spontaneous communities can occur. And I had not really thought about that very much. Maybe egotistically, I thought they were there because of me. And in fact, they're more there because of each other and the gathering. On the other hand, it made me think of myself now as a mechanism for gathering. And the storyteller in me loves that and has ideas about story events that I want to do after the pandemic is done, when it is done. And so, like, not the same kind of tour experience at all, but a different idea of where our art is in people's lives and how they hunger for human contact and story as much as we hunger for human contact and telling stories. And it's great that they can sometimes connect.
That's a really lovely story. Thanks for sharing that, Stephen. That's because I think one thing the pandemic has really done for me is it's shifted a lot of things for me about my writing life. It's when the contract for my novel, a second novel, was canceled.
Yeah.
It was, there was a time when I would have thought that would have just killed me. It would have floored me. And there were so many things going on at the time that honestly, it didn't even bother me. All I thought was, well, that's fine. Now I just have time to work on this other novel that I'm doing. And, it does make me think about after the pandemic, what do I want to put out in the world? And the whole storytelling idea and the whole what's bringing people together, what is it, what will bring people together is something that I think is really a stronger kernel in me of what I want to put forth in my art. So
great.
And I would just end by saying, I really want to relaunch this book once we can all get together and just like have an Alone Together festival. And, that would just be, I really look forward to that. And I have so much hope with all the vaccines, and that also, I think for me, shifts everything. It makes me, for a while, I think I was pretty like catatonic, and it really makes me be like, okay, this is going to end, and I better get my shit together and start doing it.
Indeed. Sue, we didn't let you weigh in. Did you have any kind of closing thoughts or observations?
My only closing thought really is of all the things that you can watch on the news each day and get upset about, this room, the heart and the soul in this room makes me feel okay. I feel like, we've got a shot at righting ourselves.
Well, I certainly second that and agree. And I want to thank each of you for sharing your words and your voices. I once again want to thank Jen, very modest and gracious, but I'm happy to say it again, that without you, none of us are here for this particular event. And your comments were very well received. I hear you, that it becomes a domino effect. And I think that epitomizes everything we're talking about as it relates to community and sharing and storytelling and wanting to connect. But usually there needs to be an impetus. There needs to be somebody that gets the party started. And you certainly got this party started. So I'm grateful to you and each of you. I think it's clear that we will want to stay in touch and continue to kind of shine this light on each other and others. And for whatever it's worth, in my capacity as a ringleader for 1455, you all are always welcome. I always want to be making sure the stage is, even if it's virtual one for the foreseeable future, the stage is always open and ready to embrace you. We want to hear, and I certainly want to share your thoughts and words. So as we head into 2021, I hope everyone is safe and keeps writing and keeps telling stories.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
Thanks for all the work you do with 1455.
Yes.
You've got a huge heart, and it's much appreciated.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
thank you, Jen.
Thank you all. And let's, like I said, let's hear from each other. And for those of you checking in, again, thank you for checking us out. Please do. You won't regret it. I mean, I can't do a better sales pitch than the readers that just read their words. But if you need a little extra nudge, it is the holiday season. What a great way to celebrate literature and the fact that a lot of writers, there's something to be happy about, and that to me is the enduring appeal of this particular collection, is that even in the darkest times, these beautiful words can sustain us. So I encourage everyone that's checking this out. Buy a copy, share a copy, gift a copy, and share this video with your friends so more people can hear about these phenomenal writers. I think we're out of time, but how about if I just say to be continued?
Hey.
I like
Thank
that.
you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank
Take
you so
care.
much.
Thank you all. Be well, and I'll see you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Good night.
Oh, I hate to leave. Ah.
I know. Bye, everybody.
Everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you follow us on our social media channels to stay up to date with what's new for 1455. And also, we would like to ask for your support. We depend on champions like you to keep us going. Visit 1455litarts.org and click support to make a contribution in any amount. We'll see you soon.